in a way, it's kind of a tribute to the state that someone who may or may not fit an image is accepted on her own terms. You know, I came to Arkansas of my own free will. You know, I was not born here, and I fell in love with the state and decided to stay, and Bill and I were married. I think that is a kind of indication of what we're trying to do in the state, that the time of feeling that Arkansas was in any way second to anybody, or the thank God for Mississippi image that we've, I think, had for too long, is beginning to disappear. And I want to do everything that I can to help that go as fast as we can make it disappear, because, you know, I have friends all over the country, people who are constantly asking me, you know, what it's like living in Arkansas, you know, why I moved here, and all the rest of it. And, you know, I'm someone who has lived in other places. You know, I've lived outside of large cities. I've lived on the East Coast. I've been all over the country and in some parts of Europe. And I just cannot think of a better place to be living right now. And, you know, that may sound kind of trite, but, you know, I just think that we've got so many opportunities, and that at the same time we've got a chance to meld what has always been, to me at least, one of the great parts of Arkansas heritage, which is our sort of individualistic tradition and the ties that bind people, with all of the possibilities for economic and other kinds of growth. So I don't know about image. I just hope that the reality is going to match what I want the image of the state to be, and if I can participate and contribute to that, I'll just be very happy about it.
Hillary Clinton knew that Arkansas needed to work for their children and their families. And this is who she is. This is what she's been her whole life.
In Arkansas, women were not in many leadership roles. Hillary came in and, you know, she was involved in education, she was involved in health care, she was involved in supporting women's rights. And I think a lot of women in this state were encouraged by what they saw in Hillary Clinton. I know my daughter was one of them.
I have known Hillary Clinton for most of my life. I think she knew me before I knew myself. And the things that I'm interested in now and the advocacy that I do is directly built upon the things that Hillary was able to do here in Arkansas.
My son has had about 84 procedures at Children's Hospital. Hillary Clinton was highly important back in the 70s and the 80s in getting children's funded and building that hospital that's impacted not only my life but my family's life as well. Due to her work, they built clinics, we have waiting rooms. My son, he is volunteer assistant coach with the high school basketball team. He smiles all the time. And she was instrumental in not only direct access, but also things like Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, which is a major policy organization here in Arkansas. That organization is still here and still working hard and still doing great things for children and families in the state of Arkansas. That is powerful, and that's leadership.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marcy Doderer, Ann Camps, Gloria Cabe, Darren Williams, Stephanie Street, Dr. Chriselle Nash, and Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Clinton Presidential Center. Thank you all so much for joining us for our second Bridge Builders program. Bridge Builders presents stories of distinguished change makers, thought leaders, and influencers. And I'd like to recognize and thank our Bridge Builders sponsors, Beth and Mike Colson. Beth and Mike, thank you so much for sponsoring this lecture series. And we also have several hosts that are responsible for hosting this reception and program this evening too, so thanks to each and every one of you. More than 40 years since becoming First Lady of Arkansas, the impact of Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton's work can still be measured in the lives of many people throughout our state. So tonight, we're going to explore the impact Secretary Clinton made and continues to make right here in our home state of Arkansas. As First Lady of our state, Secretary Clinton was a champion for women and children's health, an advocate for improved community-focused financial access, led efforts to expand early childhood education, and fought to raise academic standards, increase teacher salaries, and reduce class size. We'll begin tonight with a conversation with a panel of very distinguished individuals who worked alongside Hillary Clinton or are today leading organizations directly connected to her work in Arkansas. And following our discussion, Dr. Chriselle Nash, who has known Secretary Clinton since she was just a little girl, will offer some brief remarks and invite Secretary Clinton to make some closing comments to us. Secretary Clinton's unwavering efforts, which began right here in Arkansas, to give all people, especially women and children, opportunities to live up to their full potential, has actually motivated me for decades. And as a mother of 3 daughters, I try to instill in them the lessons of resolve and of resilience that I continue to see from Hillary Clinton every single day. To be fearless, to not be afraid of failure, and when you don't succeed the first time around, you get back up, you keep going, and continue to lead. There are now several generations of Arkansans standing on the shoulders of Hillary Clinton and her legacy, and I am very grateful to be one of them. Now, let's get started with our program. All right. Welcome, everyone. As you can see in your program, as I mentioned, we have a panel of really terrific individuals tonight. And Ann and Gloria, I'm going to start with you. The 1980s were really a turning point for our state in many ways. So from your various experiences, Gloria, I'd like to start with you. What were some of the challenges facing Arkansans during that period, and how did you work with Secretary Clinton to address some of those, specifically in education?
Well, I do think that one of the greatest challenges facing Arkansas at that time was education, for numerous reasons. And some of you may recall, as far back as in '78, there was an education expert who came to Arkansas, who studied Arkansas schools, and who said that for the average Arkansas child, they'd be better off going to school in almost any other state. But there was an election then that kept us from paying attention and moving on that study. Frank White was not interested in moving on one of Bill Clinton's studies. So that information lay fallow for a while. But then there was another election, and we got another opportunity to focus on those findings and others. In the regular section of 1983, things began to move pretty quickly, largely because we were aware that there was a pending Supreme Court decision that was likely to rule Arkansas school funding formula unconstitutional. And as a result of that, sort of being in the back of everybody's mind, and at the behest of Governor Clinton, the legislature created the Arkansas Education Study Commission in that regular session. And underscoring what we knew about our own state, in April of that same year, Terrell Bell, who was Secretary of Education, with President Reagan, issued the report that I'm sure some of you remember, A Nation at Risk, in which he said with that report that had some foreign power been responsible for the mediocrity of our schools, we would have considered it an act of war. And I mention that because later Secretary Bell was going to say that Governor Clinton and Arkansas were leaders in education reform. But right after that, the next month, the Supreme Court did indeed declare the school funding formula unconstitutional because of the way the money was distributed. So that put that issue of school funding squarely in the forefront. And this was especially important because to distribute existing funds with a new formula would mean that many districts would lose money, including the one that I represented. I was in the state legislature then representing Little Rock, and in those days we had 3-member districts, and my district ran from the river through the Heights, Hillcrest, UALR, all the way to Southwest Little Rock. And Little Rock School Districts was one that was going to be substantially harmed. This was even a bigger problem because of an amendment to Arkansas state constitution, which required a 75% vote of each house to pass anything except the sales tax. So responding to this was going to be very difficult. This whole situation of knowing that we had inadequate schools and an inadequate funding and not enough money to go around anyway. And just to give you an idea, and I'm going to look at my notes for this, Arkansas, of course, with 75 counties, in 1983 had 369 school districts and over 370 high schools. And of those high schools, 265 offered no advanced biology, 217 no physics, 177 no foreign language, 164 no advanced math, and 126 no chemistry. Our schools were educationally deficient. We no longer had a constitutional formula for distributing current revenue, which meant that no school was going to get any state money until we had a new formula, because we had no way to distribute it. And even if we did, we didn't have enough money to hold schools harmless. And we had the stiffest requirement for raising taxes in the country. And it won't surprise you to know that we were near the bottom on teacher salaries. So things really couldn't have been much worse.
Got it. Thank you. Ann, you were doing a lot of interesting things. We'll get to some of the positive outcomes, I hope, in our next go-round here. So hold that thought, Gloria. And talk a little bit about what you were doing in that time period. I know you have held a number of roles in the governor's office and then working directly with Secretary Clinton as First Lady. Talk about, again, from your vantage point, some of the challenges that Arkansans were facing in that period, and then we'll also, again, talk about some of the changes.
Well, my vantage point was, my vantage point was that we didn't move to Arkansas until appropriately Halloween Day of 1983. And my husband had just gotten out of the Air Force and had become an air traffic controller with the FAA here in Little Rock, and I wanted more than anything to be part of what was going on. Because when you're in the military, you don't get to do that. And I fell in love with the state. It was just that simple. Something happens here. We had lived in so many other states with the military. Something happens to you in Arkansas, and in particular in Little Rock. And I had the good fortune of meeting this lovely lady in the 1984 gubernatorial campaign. And 3 weeks later, Governor Clinton asked me if I could come work for him. And I'm telling you, in the real world, that doesn't happen. I was terrified. I was unprepared. I didn't know anything. I made the mistake of thinking Searcy was in Searcy County. Hot Springs was in Hot Spring County. I said El Dorado.
Oh, my goodness.
And, yeah, it was bad. And it occurred to me that I just wasn't ready. And I summoned up what little courage I had, and I called our Chief of Staff, Betsy Wright, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm just not ready. And then the miracle started. And I was introduced to Betty Bumpers, and I was working for Peace Links, and then I got the call that changed everything. And it was September of 1985, and I was asked if I would consider coming to work for Arkansas's First Lady. And I was not nearly as foolish then, and I said, I would be honored. And they said, can you come to the governor's mansion? And I said, well, you're going to have to tell me where it is. And I was too young and too excited to be terrified. The most amazing woman I have ever known in my entire life, who gave me the courage and the confidence to do something I knew nothing about. And to this day, I've asked myself, but never had the courage to ask anyone who really knew, how in the world did you hire me? But 3 weeks after I was hired to be her assistant, she went to Miami with the Southern Governors Association, and she heard about a program that she thought might be something that would help our most desperate children and their families in this state. It was the greatest adventure I've ever been on. I did things I never thought I could do, but I had the chance to make a difference. And it was the greatest woman I have ever known and the greatest work I have ever done. It was clear that the children in this state who were in economically dire straits were not getting what they needed, and they were not succeeding in school. And I knew that Governor Clinton wanted a way for these children to get the break that they needed, so that they could at least be prepared to go to kindergarten. And many of the schools didn't have kindergarten. No. Kindergarten was not, there was no K-12 then. Mm-hmm. It was first grade. Kindergarten was just, I remember someone telling me I was worse than a card-carrying communist because I wanted to put children in camps. Well, part of it was because I worked on a program called Hippie, and they didn't know what to do with that. But it was very clear that we needed to do something, and I was just one of the most honored people in the world that I had a chance to do that.
Thank you. So you all have sort of set the stage for us and told us what that time period was like around the issues of education and children's issues in that period. Now kind of like to come present day and talk to our panelists, Darren and Marcy here, because you both lead institutions that are so critical in the state of Arkansas and that are very near and dear to Secretary Clinton's heart. And as I said, really play a major role in our state. So Darren, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about when you walked at the door, when you walked in the door now, talk a little bit about what you knew about Secretary Clinton's history with your organization and how did her efforts in that time period lead your organization and help your organization grow to where it is today?
Sure, thank you for that question, Stephanie. Honestly, I didn't know much. I knew a lot about Secretary Clinton's work with children, right, and with education, Arkansas Advocates and other organizations, but I knew very little about her work for Southern Development Bank Corporation when I walked through the door. It didn't take long for me to learn about her impact and the visionary leaders that started Southern Development Bank Corporation. Mac McClarty was one of the founding board members in addition to Secretary Clinton. Bob Nash, who's here tonight, was also one of the founders. There are a number of visionary leaders who were well ahead of their time in starting this organization. Southern really was modeled after Shore Bank, which was probably the country's first development bank operating on the south side of Chicago, an economically depressed, largely minority, exclusively urban area. And they witnessed how Shore Bank was having a tremendous impact in really lifting the lives and building economic opportunities in this economic depressed area. This is the time when redlining was going on, when you really were not lending in underserved communities. And so Jan Piercy, who's here tonight, who's also working at Shore Bank, Secretary Clinton, Governor Clinton invited the folks from Chicago to Arkansas to start a bank model after Shore Bank, and the thought was, let's use that model to build something in the Arkansas Delta, one of the most persistently poor communities in all of the United States. And again, the leadership and the thought was visionary because that was really inclusive finance. That term was not thought about. They were democratizing, finance. So you don't really think about a financial institution and how it really can help build lives. Many people have access to capital and credit and don't think about it, but in these communities, they were redlined, they were forgotten about, and this effort really was a way to lift those communities and build economic opportunities. And so it didn't take long to figure out how impactful Secretary Clinton's work was. And in talking to recently Walter Smiley, who was one of the first board members, about Secretary Clinton's work, he said, really, Secretary Clinton and Dorothy Stuck were really the visionary leaders who understood how you could use finance and use a financial institution to really build and improve the lives of people. And he said, he was, in his words, he was an implementer. He just did what they told him to do. And it was really their leadership and their thought. They understood how that worked and how impactful it could be. And so it's amazing. We can talk later about how all the things that's happened since then. Right. But I didn't know going in, but now I have a great appreciation and how it's impacted not just Arkansas and this state, but also the country and even the nation.
And I think even this fall is the 25th anniversary of the signing of the legislation that really helped get a lot of this off the ground.
That's exactly right. President Clinton's experience with Shore Bank and with Southern Development Bank Corporation, when he became president of the United States, his thought was to have 100 development banks across America working in these hard-to-serve communities in what we call LMI census tracts. And through that visionary leadership, through the Regal Act, there's an institution at the Department of Treasury, the CDFI Fund, or the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, that provides resources to financial institutions that work to really lift economic opportunities in places that are underserved and forgotten about. And today, through Secretary Clinton and others, their work, there are over 1,000 CDFIs across America. That organization has really helped empower communities and build communities through government support. It's a perfect public-private partnership. Right. You use public dollars to stimulate private growth. And so about $4 billion in public aid through grants and assistance and about $50 billion in tax credits has really had a tremendous impact all across America in these communities that other banks have forgotten about, other financial institutions have forgotten about, and really is doing a lot to really build people's net worth and lift their standard of living.
Wow. Marcy, as a parent of 3 children, I'm so grateful that Arkansas Children's Hospital is in our backyard, literally. And so the fact that you lead this incredible institution, what a tremendous job you have. Can you, again, also talk about, you've been there for what?
Almost 6 years. It'll be 6 years in July. And
I know you have a history with children through your family, but again, can you talk a little bit about some of the stories maybe that you heard when you walked in the door in your first couple of months there, and sort of your role today as well?
So I don't think you can actually be deep into the weeds of Arkansas Children's Hospital and not understand the legacy that Secretary Clinton has left with Arkansas Children's Hospital. Her spirit still reverberates, really, through the halls of our facility. We've been around for over 100 years. Arkansas Children's started in 1912.
Wow.
But in the 70s and the 80s, it was but a small little place and was really designed to take care of the poorest of the poor and some sick and injured children. But there was vision for what that facility could be, to be so much more for our state, and that's where we sit today. But it's really, standing on the shoulders again of giants like Secretary Clinton. And there's a story that is particularly, I think, almost legend in the Arkansas children's world these days of how we got to be physically the size we are. Mm-hmm. Because as we were small in the 1970s, there was a vision, there was really passion to grow it, to be bigger than we were physically, but we didn't have the money to do so. And the hospital was just starting to understand what it would mean to go to the bond market, to borrow money through tax-exempt bonds and take advantage of that so that we could grow. But there was no history there, there was no track record, and it was going to take some effort, actually not in Little Rock, but in New York to make that happen. And as I understand the story, because I wasn't there, but it was January of 1980, and Secretary Clinton was very pregnant, as I understand, and it was really icy and wintry day, but she flew to New York with Dr. Betty Lowe, who is also a legend in our facility, one of the first medical directors and pediatricians at Arkansas Children's, to talk with the folks at Standard & Poor's and really help them understand what we were, but more importantly, what we could be, in order to capture a level of financing, to go to a debt market to allow this build. And if you walk the campus today, we are 2 million square feet of buildings occupying over 30 blocks of land. So that was a monumentous occasion for us, and started really propelling Arkansas Children's forward in such a way that we can grow from a 6-bed NICU in February of 1980 to a 104-bed NICU today, the only level 4, which is the highest level of NICU you can be in the state, serving kids from every single county. It's the only way we can operate a hospital with helicopters so we can get to any county in our state in less than an hour to bring those babies in when they need that highest level of care. And there are many more stories like that, but truly her spirit, the passion, and the leadership she brought to the table as a board member for 16 years, and then on in terms of her advocacy for children, child health and well-being, we wouldn't be who we are today without Secretary Clinton.
Thank you. Gloria, you painted a pretty bleak picture of Arkansas in the 80s, so I'm going to give you a chance, because I was actually a student in those periods.
Yeah, just tell it like it was, man. I'm sitting here with somebody's in school with my daughter. They seem to have turned out all right.
I think we turned out pretty well.
However,
product of Arkansas Public Schools, but let me ask you, I want to talk specifically about something really important, the Arkansas School Standards Commission. Can you talk a little bit about the origins and the Secretary's role with the commission and really the impact on Arkansas standards because of that?
Well, it would be hard to exaggerate the importance of that study commission. As I said, there was an act passed during that regular session in '83 to establish one, and Governor Clinton had the foresight to appoint Hillary its chair. And I still, when I think back, I'm really sort of amazed at what you all did. He appointed 15 other Arkansans, some just ordinary Arkansans, representatives from the Arkansas Education Association and other educators. And they went all over the state, meeting with parents and people in the community, talking to them about schools. Initially, they were taking notes and keeping lists, and finally were making recommendations based on those conversations. And it may be a little out of off my topic, but it seems to me that Secretary Clinton has been doing that ever since, going around, whether it was the state of New York or the entire country or whatever, listening to people, and from that forging solutions for issues and figuring out how to get things done. But anyway, at that time, they were not getting an enormous amount of attention, and I think that's part of the reason they were able to get so much honest and earnest response from people as they traveled around about what was really going on in their schools and what bothered them. So with that in the background, in the meantime, we had the Supreme Court decision that threw out the school funding formula. So you can imagine both the urgency and the foreboding, because until we had a new formula, no school was going to get any state money, and most of them couldn't have opened the doors. But to do that, we were going to have to raise taxes. So the pressure was really on to call a special session as quickly as possible to address all of those issues that I mentioned earlier. And there was a general notion that if we were going to raise taxes, we were going to have to give people a reason why, besides the Supreme Court decision. But because this commission, which Hillary chaired, had a number of reforms at the ready, the governor could quickly call a special session and could be ready then with a list of potential bills and reforms. In fact, they had done such a good job, Hillary presented us with 52 potential reforms for a special session. And I have to say, most of them were enacted. But even so, it would become one of the longest sessions in Arkansas's history of 38 days, well, special session, 38 days. But leading up to that special session, Arkansas did something we hadn't done before. We conducted a campaign. How many in this room remember wearing a blue ribbon? Yeah.
What year was this?
This was 1983.
Okay. I was a junior in high school. Okay.
Can I just tell you, I am so happy to see so many familiar faces. I thought, once again, I was going to be the oldest person in the room. So thank you all for coming. And,
I think she just called you all old.
No.
what can I say? Anyway, but put together a real campaign, like a political campaign, to build support for the reforms, for the recommendations, and to make the effort visible to everyone, so everyone in Arkansas could be aware of what was coming. We distributed thousands of postcards for folks to send notes to their legislators in support of it. Lord only knows how many blue ribbons got distributed. I came across one the other day in a box of papers from years ago. Anyway, yet many legislators refused to vote to raise taxes. And for the sales tax, we only needed 51 votes in the House. Even though they were passing the standards, the reforms right and left, they weren't going to pass that tax. One surprise, and if I don't get this quite right, you can correct me, Hillary, but one surprise that the commission encountered as they went around the state was how many parents were focused on grammatical and spelling errors on printed materials from their child's teacher. And I think none of us were prepared for how pervasive that was. It was a very common complaint, and it became clear that if we were going to generate enough enough new revenue for both to equalize funding and to implement these reforms, this issue had to be addressed. And so ultimately, the chairman of the Revenue and Tax Committee of the House simply would not allow a vote on the sales tax increase to come up until the legislature enacted the bill that would require all teachers and administrators to take a basic skills test. So after all of that, 38 days, at the end of the session, we had it all. We had the new standards, we had teacher testing, we had an increase in the sales tax, and a new redistribution formula. Now, no doubt this was possible only because of the work of this commission over the spring and summer leading into the special session. But there was one additional event. In addition to the work that the commission had done, Hillary appeared before the meeting of the Joint Education Committee and convinced legislators that this was important work and they needed to do the right thing. She's very convincing because you know what I'm going to say. At the end of her testimony, Lloyd George shouts out for the entire room, "Fellas, I think we might have elected the wrong Clinton."
Oh my goodness.
True. But some of the reforms, I'll just mention a few of them because as I said, there were 52. We did begin to require kindergarten in every school, set the maximum class size for 20 through the third grade, required counselors in all elementary schools, required more math, science, and foreign language, increased the school year from 150 to 180 days. How about that? 83 kids had a school year of 150 days. Required that students stay in school till they were 16 instead of the 8th grade, and tripled adult education courses to help kids who were dropouts to get their high school diploma. But interestingly, the impact didn't stop there. The standards became sacrosanct. Every education bill for the foreseeable future that was introduced had to pass scrutiny of their fellow legislators for whether or not they had any negative impact on the standards. You fast forward to the 1991 regular session, which was the last for Governor Clinton and for me. Preserving the school standards and building on them was at the top of the governor's agenda. And in that year, we had a huge increase in adult literacy and training programs, apprenticeships for college-bound youth, college scholarships for middle-class and low-income kids, preschool programs for poor kids, a residential high school for math and science. We converted 14 vocational schools into 2-year colleges and established a $4,000 raise for teachers over the next 2 years. In fact, following that session, Ernie Dumas, whom all of you know and I'm still revere as I do, said that for education it was the best legislative session in the state's history. But for me, and I have to take just a moment of personal privilege, as we would say, to say that the thing that I recall best and that has stayed with me happened not at the legislature, at the state capitol, but in my den, in my home. A young man who was a guest in our home because my kids went to Central, along with these other kids.
My kids go to Central now.
Had asked families to host some kids from around the state because of some event that was going on in Little Rock. He was from a rural school in Little Rock, and he had no idea, who I was, other than the mother of some kids at Central. So I was asking him, welcome to our home. I'd like to know more about you questions. And he looks at me and he sort of squared his shoulders and he said, I'm going to take Spanish and chemistry next year. And I'm the first person in my family to get to do it. My school never taught that before, and after that, I'm going to take Algebra 2. Well, so it put a smile on my face then and still does today. And so thank you, Secretary Clinton.
Thank you. Darren, we talked a little bit about the Secretary's history of sort of expanding access to capital here in our state. Could you talk a little more specifically about the impact that the Good Faith Fund and Southern Bancorp had, not just on Arkansas, but the region as well?
Sure. So Southern Good Faith Fund really is how I got to know Southern, because there was, the focus on the Delta region. There's no bank in Little Rock, and I'm from Little Rock. And it was when I was in the legislature that I got to come across this Good Faith Fund and found out the work that they were doing having tremendous impact on people's lives. And the Good Faith Fund really was modeled somewhat after Grameen Bank and Muhammad Yunus's work. Secretary Clinton, of course, brought Muhammad Yunus to Arkansas when starting Southern Bancorp, and it was about microfinance. Secretary Clinton understood that small amounts of capital and credit were needed in areas that people weren't lending money. And so the Good Faith Fund really focused on providing small business loans to, every big city. Every small city in America wants to have the next Nissan plant to come in and wipe out unemployment. But really what makes those communities thrive are those individual entrepreneurs who employ 1 to 5 people, including themselves, and that's what Southern Good Faith Fund was about. In addition to providing financial access to capital, it also had a policy shop, and that's how I got to know them from a legislative perspective, working on policies that were designed, or policies that actually impeded or prevented people from building themselves, building wealth and lifting themselves up. And I'll give you one example. So right now, the state of Arkansas runs a career pathways program, and it was with Southern Good Faith Fund and other partners here in Arkansas that the career pathways programs was piloted, and out of the success of that program, it became a statewide effort. So the Good Faith Fund had a tremendous impact in Southern today. So when Secretary Clinton started it, they raised about $10 million to start Southern. Today we are 1.4 billion in assets. We have 46 locations throughout Arkansas and Mississippi, and it really is a model that the other 1,000 CDFIs have been built upon. But not only the impact on Arkansas and the region. We do 7,000. We did 7,000 loans last year. 55% of those loans for less than $10,000. And so you go to a big bank, and not knocking a big bank, and say I want a $10,000 loan. You're going to be given a credit card application. But in addition to providing access to capital credit, we also provide high-touch financial development services. So we will work with people who want to build their credit, who want to establish their credit, who want to repair their credit. We do every year through our volunteer income tax assistance program, we do free tax returns. This year we did 3,600 tax returns in the state of Arkansas and Mississippi, returning about $6 million back to those markets. That money was spent right in that market, and encouraging folks who qualify to apply for and receive the earned income tax credit. And we've done that for 15 years. So that's about $40 million, going back into the markets. But the work in Arkansas and this region really now has expanded worldwide. So sustainable sustainable finance, inclusive finance, is a worldwide effort, and we are proud to be members of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, which is a group of mission-focused financial institutions across the world that really use finance to really try to solve some of society's most pressing ills. Of course, ours is poverty alleviation, but also there are issues with the environment. There are also issues with gender inclusion in business, and these institutions work across the globe using finance as a tool to really solve some of these pressing problems. And a lot of that had its start really right here because of the work of Secretary Clinton. And so there are people across the world. My family and I have got a chance to travel with GABV across the world. And we were in Bangladesh last year, and we saw, women who were making pashmirs, the scarves.
Yes, so I'm familiar with those.
And this one lady who had a business and employed about 25 other women in the region. And they're now all, economically free and independent, and they were given a $2,000 loan to start her business, and so this work that Secretary Clinton and others really started here in Arkansas really has expanded across the world, and it's becoming more and more mainstream. It's becoming more and more mainstream, and that's what you want. When you hear big banks, when you hear the CEO of BlackRock saying that businesses have to do good and do well, it's more than just about making money. It's all about making a difference. That's why I say these were visionary leaders who understood that really you can use finance to solve some of these tough issues, and I'm just appreciative of the work, and Southern is appreciative of the work, because we are really every day building communities and changing lives and touching people in ways that others really have not been able to.
Well, it's so wonderful as an Arkansans, and I'm so proud to know that a lot of these efforts that took place when obviously you and I were teenagers, not to rub that point in, but have really continued today. I know from working in the administration too, as First Lady of our country, a lot of those efforts that began here, especially like you just talked about the microfinancing, as First Lady and clearly as Secretary of State, and then now through the work of the Clinton Foundation, a lot of those efforts that started right here in Arkansas with President Clinton and with Secretary Clinton leading on many of these issues, there's a through line to present day work, and now that a lot of that work continues through the Clinton Foundation. So really appreciate that insight. It's a really, really powerful reminder to us all. And first I want to say thank you, because Ann is still continuing to really change lives and inspire young people by her work through the Clinton Foundation today. Ann leads, and I know Terry Garner, my partner here, the director of the library, will agree with me, that the work we do here for children and bringing school groups here free at no charge, literally dozens of school groups come here every day as the manager of our volunteer and visitor services operation, working with the volunteers to really inspire and train the next generation of students that are coming through the Clinton Center and experiencing all kinds of wonderful things. So just, Ann, I want to thank you for your efforts present day, for what you're still continuing to do. And I know a lot of that started with your work with Secretary Clinton. So talk a little bit about this program called HIPPY. A lot of people don't know what that acronym stands for, so talk a little bit about that. And tell us what really HIPPY does, and maybe some stories about bringing HIPPY to Arkansas, and sort of today, what is HIPPY doing?
Okay. HIPPY has even changed its name. It's still HIPPY. It started out as the Home Instruction Program for Preschool Youngsters. And I think it would have stayed that way had it not come to Arkansas. So First Lady Hillary Clinton was in Miami. They were getting ready to start this weird program named HIPPY. And this was in the early 80s. Interestingly enough, it was the big problem with the name HIPPY was here in Little Rock. But it was a program that was developed by the National Council of Jewish Women, Institute for Innovation in Education at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And it was started by an amazing woman named Dr. Avima Lombard, who had been instrumental in developing Head Start, and in particular, the home-based version of Head Start. So I clearly remember a torn out article from the Miami Herald. And the newbie sitting in the governor's mansion was asked to follow up. Follow up. I had no idea. But I did. When you're really dumb, you don't know to be scared. So I just plowed into it. And I can remember, that was in September, I can remember in November, December coming, we would meet twice a week, and I was at the mansion, and I said, I can't find anything wrong with this program. And you said, keep looking. So I did. Hippie was a program that was developed in Israel aimed at children whose families were immigrating into a Western-style society where women and girls were just as important as men and boys. And they were coming from third world nations, and the children were not doing well in school. It was that simple. It was a means to prevent school dropout. Well, that was a problem here too. But the beauty of the program, of the home instruction program for preschool youngsters, is that we saw something really important that they hadn't really recognized and promoted in Israel. The basic idea behind Hippie was to help mothers and fathers realize that they were their child's first and primary teacher, that what went on in the home was what was going to best prepare them for school. So many mothers in Arkansas didn't feel prepared to do that. Mm-hmm. And they were afraid. There was one quote that we used a lot of during those years where a mother said, I was always afraid to teach my child because I thought whatever I taught her would be wrong. Well, Hippie was a program that went into the homes, and it went in with the help of women from that neighborhood. It wasn't one of us going up to a mother who was really working her best but still needed a lot of help. We weren't saying, be like us. We were saying, this may help you be a better teacher for your children. And it provided books, it provided materials, and in training these women to go into the homes, they did it through role playing. So women who were semi-literate, who couldn't read at all, could still work with their children. It required 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 30 weeks a year for 2 years. I remember that like it was yesterday. Amazing things started happening. Not only were the teachers competing for which children they were going to get in their kindergarten classes, because we started with preschool, they wanted the hippie kids. And it was everywhere we went, that's what they wanted, because they knew these kids were going to learn, they were going to come to school fed, they were going to be taken care of medically, because Hippie provided all those services. But the biggest thing it did was give confidence to the moms, where there had been none. So much so that several years ago, Hippie changed its name to the Home Instruction Program for Parents of Preschool Youngsters. It is amazing how this program took off here. I used to tell people that Hippie was spelled with a capital C because it never had two better friends than our governor and our first lady. There was nothing. If I went somewhere and I needed help, all I had to do was ask. And I was looking through my folder to kind of refresh my things, because I can't remember what I did last week, much less what I did 34 years ago. But I found a letter from a school in India. I found a letter from a Native American tribe in Alaska. I found the Fortune magazine that did an article on Hippie. I found the Boston Globe, the New York Times, letters from governors, letters from educators all over the world, one from Venezuela, wanting to know, how did they do Hippie? And one of the coolest things that happened was that we were almost immediately recognized as this amazing program by the Harvard Family Research Center, there was no data. And so 1990 rolls around, and it's election time, and Mrs. Clinton said, we've got to make sure this program stays healthy, and we've got to move it out of the governor's office. And so I gave up my baby, and we sent it to Children's Hospital, where it happily resides, not only Arkansas Hippie, but Hippie USA. It moved from New York to Little Rock, Arkansas.
Wow.
And Children's takes care of it and grows it every day.
That's really, yes. And hearing you talk about that, it's really clear, and I know Sheila Bronfman will agree, those of us who worked on the Clinton campaign, that theme of putting people first, that wasn't just a campaign slogan. Clearly, you all were doing that in Arkansas in the late 70s and early 80s. And again, pulling the thread to present day, through the work of the Clinton Foundation, another incredible program that Secretary Clinton brought to the foundation that it's now really one of our most successful programs. It's very simple. It's all about talking, reading, and singing to your babies and empowering parents to really be our children's first teachers. And again, it's called Too Small to Fail, and it's really powerful. And again, all roads lead back to Arkansas. I love that this work really was grounded in Arkansas. The Clintons were building these bridges, putting people first in the early parts of their careers in public service. And again, today, we can really see the fruits of those efforts through all of this kind of work. So, Ann, really thank you for talking a little bit about that. Marcy, a lot of people are familiar with Secretary Clinton's early work with the Children's Defense Fund. And she's been obviously an emphatic champion for children since her very early career. Could you talk a little bit about some of the efforts that Secretary Clinton really led on, the early efforts with Arkansas Children's Hospital, and how that really laid the foundation for some of the really transformative advancements we are seeing in child health and well-being today?
How long do we have? I don't think we have enough time for all of that, because, so I touched on it just a bit ago, but the early work laid the foundation for us to grow into what is now truly a quaternary academic medical center in Arkansas, treating kids of almost anything you can imagine from an illness or an injury standpoint. Can get that care right here in Arkansas. Very, very few children must leave our state to seek health care from other institutions. But what we've also been able to do with that history is we take care of all the sick and the injured who land in our doors, who come to us either on their own or in an ambulance or a helicopter. It's allowed us to also see how can we get beyond one Children's Way, beyond Pulaski County, and understand that we have an obligation and a responsibility for the entire state. And there's some interesting statistics that drive that work for us every day that are still come from this foundation of Hippie USA that is on our campus still today. So there are about 38,000 kids born in Arkansas every year, but for the first time in Arkansas, in the United States, and actually around the globe, there are not enough babies being born in any given year that are going to replace us. Though I was in high school with them, just
okay,
to
that's
be
right.
clear.
Sorry, forgot to.
Also went to Central High. I think I'm 1 year older than Darren.
Okay.
But so if we do not figure out how to put our children first, how to create a level of advocacy that will ensure that those 38,000 children born this year have the opportunity to reach their fullest potential, then we are all going to be in a world of hurt when we get really, really, really old. And what Arkansas Children's has recognized is we want to be the only level 4 NICU in the state. We want to be able to take care of those tiniest of babies that 30 years ago didn't live but now do. We want to deliver heart transplants. We want to do kidney transplants. We want to solve for children's cancer. But we also want to make sure every baby is in a safe home, because child abuse is epidemic in our communities. And so the Hippie program that was started is now a full-service Arkansas home visiting network. It goes beyond the Hippie methodology to parents as teachers, to nurse and family first, or nurse first partnership. So we are in the home of newborns to 3-year-olds in over 8,000 homes in all 75 counties every year, trying to ensure that those children who aren't sick or injured can be touched by the services of Arkansas Children's to ensure that they can also reach their fullest potential, whether it's a safe environment to avoid a child maltreatment or neglect, readiness for preschool, education for families, dental outreach services, you name it. And so our work goes beyond the sick and injured today, and it's about how do we serve kids where they live, where they learn, where they play, how do we get out there across 75 counties and help every one of them have access to our services, not just those who happen to land here in Little Rock. And we couldn't have done that without first becoming a big tertiary quaternary service kind of children's hospital where we can take care of those sick and injured. That is the foundation that allows us then to reach out into more of a community health perspective. And that's really the transformation we're seeing today for kids of Arkansas.
Okay, that's terrific. All right, I'm going to ask you to suspend your imagination for a minute, and I want all of you, the panelists, to pretend you are in a classroom, which is actually really not that far from the truth. We like to think of the Clinton Center, especially our educational programs, as an extension of the classroom for teachers and parents through our programs. So close your eyes, pretend that you're in a classroom, and I'd like you to think about, and I'll start down there with you, Marcy, what you would like the next generation of Arkansans to know about the impact that Secretary Clinton had on our state during her time as First Lady, and anything sort of present day, some of the threads I've talked about that you would like to have the next generation understand.
Well, since I have two daughters who are some of that next generation and they are in the audience, I can speak to them as well. But we're connected through our passion for child health, and not everyone may have that, but I think what Secretary Clinton shows young people today is find that passion, find that thing that you believe can make this world a better place. It might be child health, it might be education, it might be microfinancing for women to lift women up, because when we do that, we lift everyone up. But it's to pursue that passion in a way that is an unyielding commitment to it. And I think that's what we have seen through your career, through your life, that I hope the next generation of young people, particularly young women, will take with them. It will not be easy, and it will not all be perfect, and it will certainly not all work.
Right.
But it's that passionate spirit, and I don't necessarily see that always today, and I've got to find some more passionate advocates for child health, but I think take that passion and lead with that so that you can make a difference in the world.
And then the sort of resilience and knowing that not everything's going to be perfect.
Then get back
Again,
up.
The example.
The day may suck, but then get back up.
You keep getting back up and keep trying it again until something works. Ann.
I think that I would especially want young women, young girls, women that are our age, to appreciate the fact that someone came here, wasn't raised here, wasn't educated here, came here, found herself at a place where she could change lives. And I want to just say quickly that one of the trips that I took with the Clintons when I first started was to an NGA meeting, a National Governors Association meeting in February of 1986. And Hillary graciously invited me to the First Lady's lunch. And I'd never met a lot of First Ladies, but I could not believe how they didn't understand what they could do with the position they were in. And I realized that I was among people who just needed to hear what she did so they could go home and they could do that for them. I want young ladies, and my daughter was 4 when I started working for you, and she's here tonight. She's no longer 4. To know that someone came here and became an Arkansan and brought a passion for learning, and it was cool, and it was good. And what I learned, and what I want people to learn, is that if you think you've done the best you can, you're just not there yet. You have to push yourself, and one day you will look back and go, I can't believe I did that. just one thing that makes the world better, you can do it, and especially young girls and women can do it, and I think we all know that because of the work that Hillary Clinton did here.
Thank you. Gloria, you're up.
Well, Ann did steal a little bit of my thunder.
That's okay.
And I have to confess, the reason I'm confident that what sped to my brain because it was what I have said hundreds of times while knocking on doors all over the country, explaining why people should vote for Hillary. And I would say, not as eloquently as Ann just did, but that this woman moved to our state. First place, she talked funny, right? I mean, she had a Yankee accent, what can I say? Not only that, she kept her maiden name, which, if you recall, in the 80s, everybody else could do it, but the First Lady could. There were so many other obstacles to having, to being an outsider in our state. I think that's probably true to some extent today, but it really was a big deal then. And yet Hillary came here, and remember, she was working, she had a job, and yet, besides being First Lady, yet was involved in all of these issues that made these changes in our state. And I used to say to people, because people would begin to get it, you know, because I have a different accent. It was clear that I was from the South. And what I always tried to explain, and the point that I would make to anyone, that I think that of all the characteristics that people in this room could describe, maybe the one that I value the most is that all of that effort was about getting things done. Mm-hmm. Wasn't about talking. It certainly wasn't about self-aggrandizement. It wasn't about politics. It was listening to people where they hurt, what they needed, what could government do for people, and how do we go about getting it done?
Putting people first. Darren.
So, boy, I guess I would say, you know, I think looking at Secretary Clinton's work and her public service, I would say that, you know, you can do good and do well, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is someone who eminently qualified for anything she wanted to do, but she spent her time in service to others. And, you know, they always said that service is the price you pay for the space you occupy in this world. Secretary Clinton and President Clinton's really life has been dedicated to serving others, and the visionary leadership to think about, you know, helping people who don't have access to capitals, what she was working on with Southern, how that impacts people, because, you know, Pew has a study that says that 70% of the people who are born into poverty never make it out. It becomes generational. The 30% that do make it out, what's common about them is they have some form of net worth, and that's often really sometimes equity in your home. How many people do we know use that equity to send someone to college in their family, or a small business? And so just a little bit, not large amounts of capital. We're not talking about big business. We're talking about small amounts of capital, how impactful that can be in people's lives. That was not her plight. She didn't have to work on that, but she chose, and throughout her life on all these issues, with his children, with his education, with his access to capital, she chose to serve and to think about others. And so as I have been in the legislature, and my wife and I try to encourage our kids to give back. And my son, who's here, was so excited when she came to Wake Forest in the campaign and got the chance to go backstage and meet her. And you know, it makes us proud to be from Arkansas for the work that Secretary Clinton and that President Clinton has done. I was in law school when in 1992, and before, in 91, nobody knew Arkansas. In 92, I was the most popular person in law school. And so, you know, it makes you proud to be from Arkansas, and to see the things that she and President Clinton have done really inspires everyone.
Well, again, I think it's very appropriate that the title of this series and our program tonight is really Building Bridges, and it's really been a fascinating conversation about the bridges that you and President Clinton started building back in Arkansas, and the results and the impact that has made present day, not just in our state, but has been clearly a model for things that are continuing to happen across our region and really all over the world. So I want to thank all of you all for this phenomenal discussion. So let's give our panelists here a round of applause. And so now I would like to ask a very special person and someone who also is building many bridges here in our health community in the central Arkansas area and across our state. I'd like to ask Dr. Chriselle Nash to come to the podium and share some of her reflections with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. First, let me say that I am truly honored to be with you here this evening to introduce our friend, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. You know from the discussion that we've just had and from the video and from your own personal experience, her bio and all the amazing things that she's done. But what I want to share with you just for a moment, very briefly, I promise, is how she impacted me and my family. And it's really true, if you caught the video momentarily, she knew me before I knew myself, truly. My father, who is here, has worked with the Clintons in many capacities for 40 plus years, or nearly 40 years. I'm over 40 now, but we'll skip that part. So I have many personal memories with the Clintons that include family dinners. This little skinny kid, shy, who went to Hall High School, by the way. Okay. But and had at the big table with the adults having discussion, all the way to my brother and I playing with Chelsea as a child, to college preparation, even to the ultimate. This made me popular in D.C. I was doing my medical school in D.C., and in the 90s I got to go to the White House for Christmas. So it was amazing personal experience. But even more important than that is her impact on me professionally. And I think what I want to, and the inspiration that she gives me professionally, and what I want to share with you is that I think that what she brought and showed us early on was that good policy has great impact, as we've talked about here, not only across the state, the country, but the world. And that good policy, to me, also impacts health and health care. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm a healthcare provider. I'm a public health person. I'm a population health person. And what her work has shown me, from First Lady of Arkansas to First Lady of the United States to Senator to Secretary of State, is that all of those things matter and have an impact on health. For example, education policy is health policy, right? Healthy kids, smart kids, educated kids become educated adults who are more healthy. Communities are better. Economic policy is health policy. The things that we do to lift people out of poverty, the things that we do to protect people who are in poverty, have a direct impact on health of the population and of nations. And of course, I have to mention healthcare reform. The work that you laid the foundation for, I can see the direct threads in the Affordable Care Act now that directly impact the work that I do on a day-to-day basis in the teaching that I do and in the organizations that I work with. So I want to thank you for that. My point in all of this is that in the 70s and 80s, before I knew what I was going to do or myself, we found ourselves getting upstream to the real things that impact on health in the community and in nations. And interestingly enough, now they articulate it differently and they call it the social determinants of health, okay? All right, but that's what we've been working on. That's what you laid the foundation for here in Arkansas and in my career and my career path. So as I end up, let me finally say, as a young woman, many women have been inspired by you and continue to be, directly and indirectly. And like the panelists have said, it's not about yourself or your self-promotion. It's about service to others. And that is what is a model that I also follow. And as I've gotten older and a little bit grayer, I've found out that I'm also a mentor these days. And I brought two young women with me today that I would like for them to raise their hand, please, ladies. Thank you, thank you. They are here. One, Erica, who is my niece. She has finished her first year in college. and Ashlyn, who is going to be a junior in high school, and Bryant. So I wanted them to be here with me today to experience this discussion and to understand the impact of not only Secretary Clinton, but what they can potentially do. So I want to thank them for being here with me, and I think the last thing I'll say is that I've been so blessed and I'm so inspired to continue to pay it forward. And I haven't had an opportunity like this in a forum like this to say just a personal, heartfelt thank you. Thank you. And lastly, I would ask you to join me in welcoming back to Little Rock and to the stage Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Chriselle, for not just that introduction, but everything you've done already to make healthcare accessible and affordable and to reach out and make those connections that you just talked about as to how we can really enhance individuals' health and well-being as well as that of the entire state and country. But I must admit, as I was sitting there, I was having flashbacks, picturing you as a young girl playing with Chelsea at the mansion. It was a very sweet juxtaposition. I am massively embarrassed by all of this. You know, I do feel maybe I've just sat through my eulogy. And if so, I'm going to die happy. But I am incredibly grateful to be back here with so many friends and co-conspirators on every one of these efforts that we engaged in and worked on all those years ago. And it is exciting to be part of this new program, the Bridge Builders. I want to thank our friends, the Colsons and others, for supporting this, because we really need, at this point in our history in our country, to bring people together to talk about what we can do. You know, don't get demoralized and discouraged. Think about what we can do. And often that means what we can do that will not only help somebody else, but will redound to our benefit because of all that we will get out of it. So bringing more people here to the library, having these kinds of conversations, listening to people of real expertise and experience explain the progress that is possible is a good antidote to a lot of the negativity that we hear a lot of today. So I'm grateful to everyone here, but I particularly want to thank you, Stephanie, for your leadership here at the center. Stephanie has done just an amazing job in fulfilling the purpose of the center, not just to be here in Little Rock as a repository of the past, but to keep thinking about what we can do now and into the future that will make a big difference. And Terry Garner, thank you so much for everything you've done with the library and the research. And I'm sorry, you're never going to be able to leave because it matters so much that you and this great team you have are part of preserving the history, but not just preserving, making it available. And I loved listening to the panelists because, again, I have lots of memories. I'm going to start with Gloria. I want to thank Gloria for her service in and out of the legislature. What you may not know is that she actually worked with me at the State Department. So she has herself a broad range of experiences from being a legislator, an educator, an activist, a diplomat. It is really a tribute to her incredible ability to keep energy going about what she can do that can make a difference. Her commitment to quality public education has never wavered. And I did hear that you had just bought a house in Little Rock. So,
Wow.
the circle is complete, and we expect to see it on HGTV in the weeks ahead. And Darren, thank you, because I hope that many of you learned about Southern Bancorp before today, but I bet many of you were hearing about it for the first time, and it is such a unique institution. I never could imagine the heights to which Darren could bring Southern Bancorp when we first began working on this 30 years ago. Today, you're in 1,000 communities. It's a long way from the Arkansas-based Good Faith Fund. You're helping families every single day. You're helping to build a national model. It really did start with our learning about Southern Bancorp's godmother, I guess you would say, the South Shore Bank in Chicago, and my longtime friend and Wellesley classmate, Jan Piercy, who worked with South Shore in Chicago, brought it to my attention, and then I learned about Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner for his work on microcredit in Bangladesh. So it all converged here in Arkansas, and I honestly think that this has to be one of the great Arkansas models that we have to do more to lift up so that more people in our own state here know what you're doing, but also look to it as a model, because we still have this huge disparity in banking and access to financial services, and there are so many people who cannot get access. I don't know if you could hear Darren when he said they actually give loans of $10,000 or less. That is almost unheard of in the banking system in our country today. That's why people max out their credit cards, because they can't get a loan to start a small business or expand a business or, put an addition on their home or whatever it is they are committed to investing in. So what you're doing is making such a difference. And I loved hearing Ann's story from her perspective. Don't believe all that stuff about how she didn't know what she was doing. And, I mean, she was like a dog to the bone. She took hippie and ran with it, and is probably, as much as anybody in the country, responsible for its growth and its institutionalization right here in Arkansas. I'm so proud of the difference that program has made. And we did have to explain to a lot of people that we were bringing hippie to Arkansas, but it was such a proven program based on its experience in Israel dealing with the children of immigrants. And as Ann was saying, these were immigrants, some of you might remember the big airlift that had to be undertaken to bring Ethiopian Jews to Israel, and from North Africa and other places. And they didn't have a lot of education, and the women were certainly not educated. And so when the Israelis saw that these children were not succeeding, even though they had preschool and they had excellent public schools, they did something very sensible. They said, let's figure out what we can do about that. And that's when they made the very strong link between what happened in the home and obviously what happened outside of it. So I'm very proud. And the evaluations that have been done on this program are all so positive, demonstrating a clear improvement in children's preparation for education. And Marcy, it is hard to believe that I think I first knew you as a candy striper. I don't know if your daughters will believe that, but when I read about your appointment, I was thrilled. Arkansas Children's Hospital is very dear to me. As Marcy was saying, back in the early 80s, when I first became, actually late 70s, in the late 70s, when Bill was Attorney General and I was interested in the hospital, and then certainly when he was elected governor the first time, I went to visit the hospital, and it was so overcrowded. I remember walking down a narrow hallway, and there was a child on a gurney in the hallway because there was no other space for that child to be post-surgery. I mean, it was so tiny, and yet it had such a great spirit. And one of my favorite people in the state, Dr. Betty Lowe, who eventually became the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics and took care of Chelsea and was such a wonderful advisor to me about health care. You know, she had a vision, as did others on the board who knew that we had to do something. So yes, the story Marcy referred to is true. I was 8 months pregnant, and we had to go to New York. It was January. It was sleeting. We were going in a little plane that somebody had lent us. And I said to Betty Lowe, I said, I just don't think I can go. And if any of you remember or knew her, she goes, well, I'm a doctor. I'm going with you. So off we went. And honestly, I, for a long time, thought the only reason that we got a good rating from Standard & Poor's is they wanted us out of the office quickly in case I started to deliver. But from that point on, the vision of what the Children's Hospital could be was translated into this magnificent reality. It's not only a statewide healthcare system, it truly is a model. It's one of the most highly regarded children's hospitals in the world. So I really thank our panelists. They really embody what I think of as bridge builders, because they've brought their talents and their energy and their passion and their commitment to work. It's exciting for me to look back now 40 years to when I was First Lady, and to think about the wonderful opportunities we had. The sense of dedication that so many people felt to try to improve health care, to try to improve education, to try to improve financial access. And the way we did that was to build bridges. We built bridges across businesses, across economic sectors, across backgrounds, across geographic parts of the state, to try to build an Arkansas that really fulfilled the opportunity that every single Arkansan deserved. You know, when I look back, there's so many incredible memories that I have, and I just have to, you know, link a lot of that up. So for me, the work I did at Children's Hospital, and then I was in every Memorial Day weekend we did the Children's Miracle Network telethon. I don't even think they do telethons anymore, but we did telethons to raise money for the hospital. And just being with the people at that hospital, having my own daughter taken care of there, really influenced me to help make the Children's Health Insurance Program a reality when Bill was president. The same with what I learned about early childhood development, to try to champion pre-K programs, the earliest learning programs, quality daycare, all of which is very critical still today. And as Stephanie said, we started a program at the Clinton Foundation about children. It's called Too Small to Fail, and it is a program designed to, once again, help parents realize they can be their child's best first teacher, and to give parents the confidence and materials to read, talk, and sing to their children, and to build brains. Yesterday I was at a program in Washington, D.C., where we were talking about healthcare and the arts, and there was some fascinating research from the National Institutes of Health about how when you sing, when you dance, when you look at art, when you are involved in, you know, just being out of yourself and in some artistic experience, how your brain lights up. And there was one experiment that they had done where they took some patients with Parkinson's who had a really hard time walking, and they put headphones on these patients. They were all adult patients, and they had a beat that was being played, and that beat into the brain sent a message that was able to be conveyed to the legs, to be able to walk straighter and not be so, you know, off balance. And we could see it up there on the screen. And so when I think about talking, reading, singing, exposing children to the arts, you're really building brains. And that's what was happening in Hippie, as those parents were being helped to understand that they could literally build their child's brain by talking. Just 20 minutes a day could make a difference. And when we did the education reform, I don't know if Don Ernst is here, but he traveled with me to every county. And it was interesting what Gloria said, because we had such serious conversations with people who would gather together in a school cafeteria, to talk through what they wanted for their children and for the school and their community. There was no social media. People had a chance to think, not react. Mm-hmm. They had a chance to try out ideas, not to be condemned or praised prematurely. They could literally get into that really difficult work of trying to envision something different and hopefully better. And it was exciting. And I was thrilled to hear Gloria's story about the young man who came to see her at her house, because in the years after we did the reforms, I saw that all over the state. And tomorrow, I'm going to the Math, Science, and Arts High School in Hot Springs to give the commencement address. And so that work continues. And I guess finally, I would say that the work that Darren and the bank did continued to influence me throughout my work as a senator. I spent a lot of time trying to bring economic opportunities to upstate New York, which is also economically challenged, and there's lots of big rural areas in upstate New York where there's not much business activity, not much financial service capacity, a lot of agriculture in most of New York. I gave a speech once on the floor of the Senate about New York, talking about agriculture, because, of course, nobody from the Midwest or the South or California thought there was agriculture in New York. So I had a picture of a cow, and I said, this is a cow, and it lives in New York. And so one of my colleagues came over and said, well, I'm glad you got one cow in New York. So, but that work that we started here in Arkansas was really important to what we tried to do there. And, of course, I brought that work with me to the State Department, because the economic development efforts that we were encouraging so people could be more self-sufficient, could build up capital, could see a future for themselves, was very much in America's economic and strategic interest. So this is work that we today talked about in terms of Arkansas, where it began, what it accomplished. It needs to continue here, and it needs to be spread even further, because that work is far from finished. We still don't guarantee every child to have the education that he or she deserves to have. We certainly don't guarantee everyone has health care as a right, not a privilege, that is accessible, affordable, and of high quality. We don't have the kind of financial system that really helps people build from the bottom up. So there's still much to be done, but I do think it's exciting to have a little bit of a retrospective about what we were able to do, and to encourage Arkansans today to keep thinking about how to take it even further, to pay it forward, to do more than has been done, which is something that I think every generation is called to do. So it takes work, it takes commitment, and dare I say, it takes a village. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.